Finally! The camera comparison video that you all have been asking for many months is here. The Vivo X300 Ultra versus the Oppo Find X9 Ultra. And after countless calls trying to get hold of this phone, thanks to DirectD, I managed to get it. And in this video, I guarantee you that someone's going to get really angry with what you're about to see over here. So watch first and buy smart. Now, as usual, during my comparison videos like this, there'll be no specs mentioned, just purely a comparison and the overall context of each phone and the focal length as well. So let's get started now. Now, starting from the ultra-wide lenses, both focal length are at 14mm. Now, the dynamic range for both was equally good. And the barrel distortion, which was on the previous Pro variant of the Vivo, is no longer an issue on this particular Ultra. So because of that, both phones are sharp from edge to edge. And the only difference would be the skies, as the Vivo is a little bluer. And the story was the same for the second comparison photo and also for this third comparison photo. Now, before comparing the main and the zoom photos, something that we all can expect for both phones is the fact that each phone interprets each zoom value differently. So let's compare the quality based on the focal length of each photos instead. Because the key here is consistency. Which of these phones has the consistency of the colors and of course the quality? Because what's the point of having a zoom value of 70,869 times zoom and getting a photo that looks like a wasted chewing gum? Yep, I'm looking at you, nothing Phone 4a Pro with your 140x zoom. Now, starting from the 35mm focal length, what's interesting is that both look very similar. Even the blue skies were very close to each other compared to the ultrawide lenses shown earlier. Now, the consistency of the colors between the 35mm and the 70mm was spot on when you compare those two at the same time side by side on the Vivo, and the same can be said on the Oppo as well when you compare the 35 to the 70mm, where the consistency remains throughout. And even if you have the 70mm and the 85mm on the Vivo, it was also the same and as expected on the Oppo on this particular focal length side by side as well. But where the color signs start to drop is when you start increasing the zoom value to about 460mm, as the Oppo gives you a different look compared to the 85mm earlier as seen side by side. But Vivo though remains consistent as seen side by side for its very own 85mm compared to the massive 460mm. And that consistency remains even if you compare the 460mm to its max zoom of 2412mm or the 70 times on the Vivo. But if you put against Oppo's 460mm against its max value of 2758mm, well, yes, 120 times is far more superior than 70 times zoom, but as seen over here, the quality was nowhere as good. But what's interesting is the fact that Vivo technically doesn't lose over here when it comes to the max zoom, because as mentioned, each phone interprets zoom values differently. Because if you compare the max zoom on the Oppo is 2758mm against Vivo's max zoom of 2412mm. So yes, while 70 times versus 120 times sounds like a lot of a difference, but from a focal length perspective, it's actually not far off. So yeah, hit the like button below if you find those facts interesting. Then the story was the same on the next batch of photos when comparing the 35mm focal length, but the 70mm on the Oppo was not as consistent with the 35mm earlier because the building became a little darker on the Oppo for some strange reason. Then out of nowhere, Oppo decided that life was quite dull because suddenly the 230mm focal length looked desaturated on the whole building compared to Vivo's consistency throughout. And I stopped at 690mm because as you can see, there's more overall details and better color accuracy on the Vivo as well. Now, as usual, my portrait mode test starts with a comparison of taking a photo of a person first. And here's another context because once again, the focal length differs from phone to phone. Firstly, on the Vivo's camera app, there is a 14mm. Yep, 14mm portrait mode. And then there's also a 35mm, 50, 85 and 135mm. So that's a total of 5 focal lengths. And compare that with the Oppo, which has a 23, 35, 47, 70, 85, 135, and even a super far 230 millimeters. So that's an extra 2 focal length on the Oppo. But when it comes to comparing both phones, or each of the focal length on this portrait mode side by side, what we need to know is the subject's edge detection and also the color accuracy, and of course the dynamic range of the background blurred area for you and me to know which is better. So when comparing the 35mm, both look great on each of the areas mentioned earlier, but in terms of the color accuracy, Vivo did better at capturing Roshan's red hat, as it looked like that in real life, and the consistency was the same for the 85mm as seen side by side, and there's also a better blend of contrast on Roshan's face compared to Oppo making his whole face brighter, which was not the case in real life. But what's interesting is that while both photos have the same aperture value of f5.6 and even the same shutter speed too, the background was more blurred on the Oppo, which is not a problem at all, but I do think that this is due to the image processing from Oppo. So the only factor that Oppo has here is the versatility, which can be good and maybe not so good. And what I mean by this is that if you want to take photos without moving back and forth too much, Vivo gives you that, which means that if you stand on one place, if you switch to portrait mode and you take photos on this particular 5 focal lengths, you just have a tiny shift back and forth. But on the Oppo, since the maximum portrait mode is at 230mm, you suddenly need to move quite far back. So imagine if you are busy trying to take a photo and someone is at the back of you and you knock them, or God forbid, if you are next to a pond, you might be ended up swimming and taking a photo. So for this case, I do prefer the ease of not moving too much and the color accuracy more than anything else. Now, when I reviewed the Vivo X300 Ultra, I questioned why Vivo needed the 14mm portrait mode, because I find it to be too wide. But now for situations like this, when you take photos of a subject, like for this particular flower, for example, it makes sense because it allows you to take some very interesting angles and be very close to the subject too, compared to starting immediately at the 23mm on the Oppo. However, when you compare the 35mm focal length on both, it did turn out great as seen side by side. And while the image was a little darker on the Vivo at the max portrait focal length of 135mm, but the subject to background blur was very similar too, even when you look at the aperture value of f16 compared to f10 on the Oppo. Now, as for you macro mode fans out there, this comparison is for you. But before that, here is another context. Because on the Oppo, while there are many focal lengths when you go into the macro mode, the best macro mode focal length is at 70, 139 and 230mm, which is equivalent to 3, 6 and 10 times zoom. But on the Vivo, which has also other focal lengths as well, the best macro shots is at 85, 170 and 230mm, which is 2.5, 5 and 6.7 times zoom. So yes, notice how it interprets zoom values differently again. Yeah, a lot of work, my friends. Now, just by comparing the photos of this single coffee bean at 85mm on the Vivo against 70mm, the details on the coffee bean was brighter on the Vivo, and the details was also more prominent on the 170mm on the Vivo against the 139mm macro shots on the Oppo, and it was so much better at the max focal length at 230mm for the Vivo as seen over here side by side with the Oppo. Now, another area of being a little different is the selfie portrait focal lengths. Now on the Vivo, there's the regular wide selfie and a super close-up of 2 times zoom, but on the Oppo it has almost like an ultra wide and also the main. Now I do prefer the ultra wide look for the front camera compared to having the 2 times mode on the Vivo. I still do not know who asked for this, but yeah. However, here's where probably you can see the weaknesses on not this phone, but also this phone as well. Because if the light is towards your face, then hell yeah, it's one of the best selfie photos taken on a phone, both on the Oppo's 21mm and Vivo's 24mm, or even Oppo's 25mm with Vivo's 2 times of 47mm. But if there is a backlight behind you, or a sun shining behind you, then the photos will look like this. Yep. Truly surprising results, which funny enough was a totally different story at night though. But before we go into the nighttime photos, if you're finding this video helpful so far, do leave a comment to tell the people running the YouTube algorithm that this video was good for you, and a subscription will be extra sweet too. So thank you, and thank you very much in advance. So at night, the ultra-wide lenses color accuracy was a little more accurate on the Vivo, where the green ceiling lights was exactly how it was when I was there. So while both phones have the multispectral sensor, it shows that Vivo has been more consistent in getting accurate color than the Oppo during the day and also for this case at night as well. And this comes down to more than just having a multispectral sensor, because it's using Zeiss optics and Vivo's own imaging chip. And yes, years of color tuning all working as one. And the same could be said for this second image, where the skies were a bit bluer than black on the Vivo, since it was taken between 7:30 to 7:45 p.m. Malaysian time, which is a bit more bluer, where the skies are not completely black. So here's where Oppo got the image processing a little wrong over here. But things start to improve on the Oppo when it comes to the main lenses, as the 35mm were great on both. On top of that, the good news is that there was no color shift present when you put the 35mm and the 85mm focal length photos side by side on the Vivo. So it was on the Oppo too. Then zooming straight to the car's number plate at 460mm on both, it was the battle of the image processing, as Vivo was a little brighter overall, but both was equally sharp. And for some strange reason, you feel like you want to zoom in further, here is how it looks on both at this max zoom range. Then the next batch of photos was based on how both phones handle the highlights and shadows, and yes, both did very well at 35mm and 70mm, even at 230mm too. Next, to challenge both phones further, I took a picture of a scene that had very minimal light, or more of a darker scene, to find out which does better. And guess what? Even though the focal lengths were a little different, the floor's textures towards the far right was a bit more prominent on the Vivo compared to the softer image on the Oppo. It's not hell of a difference, only if you really zoom in closer, because everything else was spot on. And with zooming into 230mm when it was focused at this particular signage. Then as for portrait mode on humans as a subject at night, please do not mind Thiru looking away at this shot, because he had to stand there quite a while and take photos on both phones, and that's the reason why he looked away for a quick second when this photo was taken. And while the overall quality was good on both, if I had to nitpick, here are two things that I didn't find it to be perfect. Number one, there is once again a weird artifact on his neck, just above his collar. Number two, his left arm was out of focus and it blended more into the background compared to Vivo keeping things very nice and proper. And in case you're wondering, yes, both phones were updated to the latest software before taking all of these photos. So hopefully a future update or a software update on this particular phone can help with that weird artifacts that Oppo has been giving us. But at 85mm, Thiru's hair was captured better at the top part on the Oppo compared to the Vivo, and so it was for the 135mm on the Vivo and 135mm on the Oppo. And while the max focal length on the Oppo was great up to 230mm, but if you compare Oppo's very own 135mm against its 230mm side by side, you can see quite a color shift, specifically on his skin tones. Now switching over to the front camera for nighttime selfie. For scenario number one is where the light is shining towards you, and the ultra wide angle selfie was as good as their daytime selfie. And when compared to Vivo's main 24mm and Oppo's main 25mm, the quality was really good too, just slightly different on the skin tone on each. Now remember when I showed you the picture when I was taking selfie on the backlight during the day with the sun shining at the back, right? And it did not look good, right? Well, the good news is that it handled that very well at night, both on the Oppo and also on the Vivo at the 21mm and 25mm. But then again, there was the weird white glow on my nose and my neck just below my right chin. So yeah, that was the case of the Oppo coming up with things out of nowhere once again. Now, if you want a written version of this entire video or a web version of this video, we do have one at our website at www.adamlobo.tv. Links to the website will be down below, where we also have some daily tech tips and daily tech news over there too. Next is video comparison time. Now, while both can record up to 8K, let's take a moment to have a proper realization that none of us are going to be shooting in 8K and posting it on socials, phones, okay? So starting from the 4K video quality for both on the ultra-wide lenses, the quality on both was really good, but the vivid look that Oppo has on the skies does make it look a little more fake on the Oppo, but some people may like it, so I guess this is based on a personal preference. And this more vivid and punchy look on the Vivo remains, but it was more natural on the Vivo. So this color difference reminds me of the Leica Vibrant and the Leica Authentic of the Xiaomi phones, but is on these two particular phones instead, with the natural and the more vivid look. Now by default in the camera app is at 2 times on the Oppo and 2.5 times on the Vivo. Again, the same great results on both, but beyond that you'll be introducing some extra sharpening on both phones, as seen in the 6 times footage on the Oppo and the 6.7 times on the Vivo. So I would just recommend just sticking to the 2 times if you want the utmost best quality video without the over sharpening. Now stabilization wise, it was very nice and gimbal like on the ultra wide lenses on both. So it was on the 1 times, and yes, there are different focal lengths once again, because Vivo's 1 times is at 35mm compared to Oppo's, which is at 23mm. Now the stabilization was still good at 2 times on the Oppo and 2.5 times on the Vivo, but where it starts to fall a bit more on the stabilization is Oppo's 6 times compared to Vivo, still doing well at 5 times. And if you really need to go up to 10 times, you'll find a Vivo doing a lot better. But yeah, why even bother going that much zoom, my friend? I don't think you need to. Now there's log recording of both phones, and both did very well, whether or not it's from the ultra-wide lens, the 35mm and the 85mm as well. But I have to give extra credit for Vivo's dedicated camera app, which looks very close to the Blackmagic camera app. And we also need to appreciate the fact that it was so much easier to switch to this particular Pro mode from the video mode on the Vivo compared to Oppo, where you need to go to the More tab first and then select the Pro video from there. So yeah, those tiny little software tweaks helps people like you and me to improve the overall experience when it comes to using the phone. Then as for portrait video, the versatility of Oppo in its portrait capabilities is back again, because it has up to 5 focal lengths to choose from: 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 5 times and 10 times, but Vivo has 3. 0.4 times, 1 times and 2.5 times. And while both look really great for capturing more in the studio, but the Vivo captures the footage at 4K 60fps instead of just 4K 30fps on the Oppo. So it does come down to which you exactly need, right? More focal length options or the ability to slow down in post to give you that cinematic look. Well, if you know me, you know my answer to that. Then to wrap the daytime shots for the front cameras, the quality was good at 4K 60fps recording on both for the front cameras, for the wider focal length on both as well. But Oppo tries to make my face bright consistently, even though I was facing under the shade too, which depending on how you look at it could be good, because again it's more of a natural look on the Vivo compared to really trying to make things look better on the Oppo. So if you want the best looking footage, you would get it on the Oppo, but a more natural footage on the Vivo instead. Stabilization wise, both were really great in this particular footage, and I did prefer the footage coming out from the Oppo a bit more, since the dynamic range was also overall better. And here's a vlogging test for you to hear how the audio recording is on both phones, so you can be the judge.
Right, this is a vlogging test using both the phones side by side. Now for my viewfinder or looking through the screen, I can see that the dynamic range on the Vivo looks a bit better when it comes to capturing the blue skies. Now this is of course a vlogging test for you all to hear how the recording is for the audio recording. I'm at the side of the road, so there's a lot of cars. So if you are planning to use both of these phones, here's an audio test for you to hear the differences. So let me know which one you think is better in the comment section below.
Okay, so it's nighttime again. Woohoo, party! So the video quality was very consistent and good on all of the focal lengths that I recommended earlier, specifically for the ultra wide, the main and the 2x zoom. But the area that I really wanted to compare is the lens flare, which was very common on smartphones, because take a look at this footage of the iPhone. Yep, it's lens flare city, baby. And yes, as you can see side by side, both the Vivo and the Oppo did an excellent job of managing that. Then stabilization on both phones and the ultra-wide lenses was good, just like during the day. So it was for the main lenses too, but try not to go beyond 6 times on the Oppo or even Vivo's 5 times mode, because the stabilization at night stops being great over here. Then if you really need to use locked recording at night, here's how it looks in different focal lengths on both. And even if there is any noise in the footage, the good news is that you can always clean them up in post since the recording data is in a log format. Then when it comes to the front video footage at night, here's where I find that this is surely one of the biggest Achilles heels for both phones, because the overall footage was decent, not mind-blowingly good as you saw during the day. So do use this wisely under some light shining towards your face, and I would totally not recommend using the 2x selfie mode video at all, because as seen in these two footages of each phones, where suddenly Oppo gives you that opportunity to use the 2x in video but not in photo. So yeah, just use the 1x mode if you really need to, because the overall stabilization was great. So in conclusion, which one should you get? Well, if consistent natural color across every single focal length matters to you and video quality is something that you take very seriously, then get the Vivo X300 Ultra. But if zoom reach is your whole world and you need the flexibility for a more focal length for both portrait and video, then the Oppo Find X9 Ultra is your phone. Now both are genuinely class leading. Now as usual, I'm not gonna cop out and give you my pick, and my pick is the Vivo X300 Ultra because of how well it suits the type of shooter that I am. But honestly, who cares what I think? What matters more is what you think. So let me know in the comments below and tell me which one you would choose and why.